Welcome to SVN3E Environmental Science. This is Wendy Espania, and we are on our last night of the course. Tonight, we are going to review all the units that we've gone through and the lessons and get us ready for the final exam. On the screen right now, you can see the study guide, which brings us right back to where we started in the course. And I'm just going to go through a few interesting or important things in the study guide. Okay, so we know that we have the 4 units. So the 5 lessons for each unit. We started with Unit 1. We were guardians of the Earth's spheres and maintaining healthy ecosystems. And lesson 1 to 5, Unit 2, environmental effects on humans, lesson 6 to 10. Unit 3, using energy in our lives, lessons 11 to 15. And Unit 4, making workplaces safe and buildings energy efficient is using natural resources with sustainable practices. And that was lesson 16 to 20, kind of a bit of a mixture in there for that one. Okay, we've done the questions that have the key questions at the end of each of the units, and now we're down to the evaluation. And it says right there in the middle of page 3 of the booklet, it says, in order to be granted a credit in this course, you must complete all of the questions that are listed in the course notes after each lesson, submit them for evaluation. Done that. And part 2 check mark is complete the final exam. That's what we're going to do today. All right, we're going to go back over each of the units one at a time, and we're going to do that using the textbook. I think the textbook will be a little bit more informative than our notes, but if we need our notes, we can always go over to those too. Okay, I'm just getting the textbook on the page, and there we go. All right, so we want to have a pretty good overview of the whole course. The exam will cover all of the different units that we've covered. So I'm just going to do a quick review of each one. Okay, the environmental spheres. Unit 1 section 1.1 of the textbook, lesson 1, components of soil, water, and air. And we know that the 3 spheres are soil, water, and air. We know what makes up soil. We've got that chart there on the page 3, showing us what makes up the good soil. And we've also went through, as you can see on the next page, water. There's a few things about water. We talked about the water cycle, and we talked about acids and base. That was a big part of it, right? So you should know when something's an acid and when something's a base, and what alkalinity, neutral, and all those terms mean. We also talked about air, and we looked at what makes up the majority of air, and that's there on that in that section. And we also talked about what the different cycles are. The carbon cycle. There's different cycles, but that particular unit had the carbon cycle. Okay, so that is it for the 3 spheres. And we went over those an awful lot. So I would think in that one, it would be mostly going back and probably looking up pH and knowing what acid, base, pH is, neutral pH, maybe what we would want for pH of a good soil. Okay, so that was just the introduction of those different spheres. All right. Lesson 2 was effects of human activity on soil, water, and air. That was section 1.2. And we can see there we have how much of the Earth's soil is taken up in different agricultural uses. We spent a lot of time talking about soil. We talked about topsoil, There's good definition on that page of 1.2. We talked about erosion and the effect that that has on soil and how we have to be very careful if we have, sorry, going to the wrong page here. If we lose our topsoil, what that does. And so really important that we know what happens when we clear cut, what erosion does. Okay, those were all parts of lesson 2. Water, we were looking at what we can do to water, right? What are human activities that we put into water, the different parts of water, the groundwater and the surface water, and how different human activities put chemicals into those. All right, there's a nice picture on page 13, the next page, that shows how water gets polluted. And you can see how we affect air. You can see the burning of fossil fuels, all the emissions that are given off, and the formation of smog. You need to know that. And that what's happened to the ozone layer as a result of burning those fossil fuels. The effects of acid precipitation, and how carbon emissions have increased over the years. All right, so that is lesson 2. Lesson 3 is methods of sampling and monitoring. Okay, we've done a lot of that in the course. The quality of soil, water, and air. So you want to look at O horizon, A horizon, B horizon, C horizon, and D horizon of soil. Remember, in particular, A and B are the ones we talked about the most. We want to look at how we take samples of soil and test it. We looked at all the different ways that we can do tests on soil and what those tests tell us. The depth integrated sampling of water and how that works, where we put down the we lower a pipe into the water, careful not to touch the bottom, and then pull it out, and it gives us an idea of what's in that water, and that we continue to monitor it. Remember, we do samples and then we monitor. That's what we keep doing. Okay, and that's how we can find what's in the water. There's lots of tests we do on the water: microbiological testing, chemical testing, radiological testing, turbidity. That was a term we used quite a bit in the course. And then warnings about contaminated water. Remember that? We talked a little bit about some examples of where that's been an issue, contaminated water. And then we ended with air. Stack sampling, showing a stack is the big tall pipes that are coming out of factories. And we talked a lot about particulate matter in the air. Okay, and the air quality index. So we talked about the categories for the air quality index and why you would want to be careful about if the category is very poor, what effect that has on our lungs. Okay, so that was the first section of the course. We then went on to the next section, which is 2.1, and that is lesson 4. We're still in unit 1, and we started looking at maintaining healthy ecosystems. Really got into what's an ecosystem, being able to talk about producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, quaternary consumers, even though we didn't see too many of those. It's a nice little example of the food chain there in an ecosystem at the bottom at page 29. We looked at other cycles again. This time we looked at the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. We looked at how human activity upsets those cycles. That was something we went into in a lot of detail. We looked at natural ecosystems versus human activity systems. We know that natural ecosystems depend on decomposers. Another important part of a ecosystem are the decomposers. And we looked at all of how organic plant and animal matter can be biodegradable, broken down, and that pollutants are often in the waste that we get rid of, and how they cause problems. And then we looked at the human activity systems, and we looked at all the different ways that we have waste and better ways to get rid of those wastes. Biosolids, for example, was something we thought we talked about using to help get rid of waste. And we looked at, even with biosolids, which is using our wastes as decomposers, also taking and using them to create more fuels. Okay. And looking at how we can take organic matter from the biosolids and put that back onto crops. Right. So that was 2.1, or lesson 4. And the last one in lesson 5 is section 2.2, and that's how carbon footprints measure the activity of impact of human activities on the environment. We looked at a carbon footprint. You should know what is a carbon footprint. You should know causes of what causes of GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, are, and what brings down greenhouse gas emissions. So what causes them, plus also what decreases them. You should be able to talk about the carbon footprint and how it's measured. And then what are ways we can reduce the carbon footprint? Okay, that's a really big one. How different, there's the hybrid vehicles, the hybrid electric vehicles, okay, in particular, and how they have an impact on reducing our carbon footprint. How richer countries make larger footprints. That's a big thing we talked about quite a bit. Why Canada has a large footprint when we have so few people. The United States has lots of people, but we have a lot less people, and we still have a very big carbon footprint. Okay, and then ways of reducing that carbon footprint. You should come up with many ways. We talked about it quite a bit in the class. How people can attempt to become carbon neutral, where you aren't producing any more carbon than you're actually helping to get rid of. So that's called being carbon neutral. And how governments need to help out with making less of an impact, less carbon footprint on the planet is also important. Okay, so that was carbon footprint. That was the end of Unit 1. That was the end of Unit 1. All right, we're now on Unit 2. Go over there. Section 2.3 kicks off Unit 2. Unit 2 starts with how human activity affects ecosystems. Alrighty, so you want to go over and look at the effects of oil spills on aquatic ecosystems. And we did a lot of work on what the oil slick can do to an ecosystem. Sorry, I just realized I don't have this on the screen. Give me 1 second and I'll get that on the screen for us. Just going over to Unit 2. I had Unit 1 on the screen still. That's why that wasn't working. Okay, so zoom to page level and full screen mode. Okay. And let's get that Unit 2 on our screen. Just give me a second. Unit lesson. Okay, give me a second. I just got to go over and try to figure out where Unit 2 is and why I can't see it on my screen. Okay, there it is. There we go. Okay, that should do it. Okie dokie. Unit 2, where are you? There we go. Okay, how human activity affects ecosystems. Got it. And I just need to get it on the... Got it. There we go. Sorry, that took me so long. And we should be able to see that now. And we've got how human activity affects ecosystems. Excellent. Okay, so we're starting with, we talked about the Exxon Valdez and how it had an oil spill and what that did to the ecosystem. We have emulsification, evaporation, oxidation, and spreading, how an oil spill spreads and affects plants and animals, and birds. That's another one. We have terrestrial or land-based ecosystems. We talked a lot about acid rain and the effect that acid rain has on these ecosystems, what it does to trees in particular, and then how those different chemicals and acid rain can go into the soil and into the water supply, and what happens when it does that. Acid precipitation in Ontario, we kind of talked about that. Why, how we can recover ecosystems after they've been affected by acid rain. Cleaning up oil spills and cleaning up acid rain. So that was the beginning of Unit 2, Lesson 2.3 or Lesson 6. Okay, Lesson 7, invasive species. We did a whole section on invasive species. We looked at the effects. We discussed what native species mean, what alien species mean. We talked about habitat and populations, terms we didn't know at the time. We talked about competition for resources, predator and prey relationships, and then we looked at non-native species and alien species and how if these are species that are living in an ecosystem where they weren't originally found, and now they're there. And then we went right into, and we gave a lot of examples of those, and we went right into 8 invasive species. So we know that invasive species are ones that harm the native species, okay? So they come into the ecosystem and they begin competition for the resources, and as a result, they cause the species that are there to die off. All right, we introduced the term biodiversity. Wow, that's interesting, eh? And carrying capacity. We looked at the beginning of monitoring and controlling invasive species. That was the beginning in our work on monitoring and controlling. We've done different looks at that. We looked at controlling invasive species and how we can do that. And that was our intro to a lot of those terms: biodiversity, invasive species, populations, etc. Okay, we are on Unit 2, continuing with common environmental factors, Lesson 8, 3.1 in the textbook, Lesson 8. And we're looking at air pollution, the effects on other environmental factors. Okay, we looked in particular at carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter. We did a lot of work on that. We looked at hydrocarbons and burning hydrocarbons, and smog. Did a lot of look at the effects of those on humans. In this lesson, we basically just looked at what the factors were. We looked at ultraviolet radiation from the sun and looked down the list of different types of electromagnetic radiation and the effect they can have. And we looked at the ozone layer, the effect of chlorofluorocarbons and greenhouse gases on the ozone layer. You should know that. You should know that there's been global warming and some of the effects of that global warming on animals like the polar bear, humans as well. Noise pollution, we just touched on. That's pretty basic though, just what is noise pollution and what kind of effects can it have. Soil and water pollution is a big part. We did a lot of work on that. So we want to look at what heavy metals do, workplace chemicals that might go into soil, and pathogens. All right, and how these can be very, very deadly to humans, animals, plant life. All right, so that was it for common environmental factors. And now we're really getting into it because we're going into how environmental contaminants enter the body. So now we started to talk a lot about the human biology of the course. We talked about the respiratory system and how the different parts of the respiratory system, and how when we breathe in, where air goes, how that air full of oxygen goes into the alveoli and from there into capillaries into your blood and is transferred all over the body and brought back again with other wastes, carbon dioxide and water in particular, comes back to the lungs and then breathed out. We have our defenses against contaminants that we inhale. Then we talked about the digestive system. We talked about how food comes into our mouths, how it begins to break down, and how digestion is the breaking down of the food in order to get the nutrients from it. All the parts of the digestive system, and how it is also aided by the liver and the pancreas and the gallbladder. And then how once we get to the small intestine, the villi are wrapped, the capillaries wrapped around the villi. Those are the small projections in the small intestine, and how absorption of the good stuff in the food, the nutrients that come out of the food, are taken into those villi. And then how we also have body defenses against getting some of the contaminants. We started in this lesson on that. Getting in through the skin, we talked about the structure of the skin and how that protects us, how contaminants spread through the circulatory system. We should know the circulatory system and all the parts of the circulatory system. And that was it for lesson 10. All right, now we have lesson 11, 3.3 in the textbook, and we're looking at how the human body reacts to environmental factors. So if we have things enter our body like radiation, in particular, we talked about the respiratory system, things coming into our body through the respiratory system, what reactions could be, and some of the diseases there. We looked at how this digestive system can react to pathogens, some of the reactions, some of the diseases caused. We looked at the skin reacting to irritants, different things that can be absorbed in through the skin. And we looked at some of the contaminants, environmental factors, reactions, and diseases that can come in through the skin. We also looked at what happens if we have UV rays or radiation, and how that affects the skin to form melanoma, a form of skin cancer. That was something we talked Oh, we then introduced the lymphatic system, and we looked at how the circulatory and lymphatic systems react when we have contaminant or a pathogen. Pathogens, remember, can be a virus, bacteria, protist, fungi, something like that. We gave some examples there of how the lymphatic system works with the circulatory system to fight off if contaminants do get in, how the nervous system can be affected by contaminants. All right, different things that can affect know a little bit about parts of the nervous system. And we talked about how your urinary and reproductive systems can react. What the urinary and reproductive, not so much, well, yes, I guess we did do both. Urinary system parts and what they do, that system does. And the reproductive system is obvious what it does, but again, how they can be affected, the types of things you can get if your urinary and reproductive systems have contaminants. All right, and that was lesson 10. So now we're on to lesson 11. All right, we are on to medical and non-medical ways to protect yourself from environmental factors. Okay, dokie. So we started with medical ways. We looked a lot at vaccines. Okay. So this was lesson 11, medical and non-medical ways. We looked a lot at vaccines. Vaccines had a lot of, oops, I'm sorry, I keep not realizing that I need to move to the next. I'm over on unit 3. Okay, here we go. Uh, just give me 1 second and I'm gonna, okay, here we go. We're good. Alrighty. I'm on 3.4. There we go. Medical and non-medical ways to protect yourself from environmental factors. Okay. So in that case, we're looking at vaccines. Vaccines was huge. We did a lot of work on vaccines. We looked at what vaccines do, how they work. We also then moved to medications. We looked in particular at a disease like malaria and how we use medications to protect ourselves against that. We looked at triggers for asthma and how we can protect ourselves against that. We looked at non-medical ways to protect ourselves from environmental factors. Sunscreen was a big one. We talked about how sunscreen works, what SPF means, and we looking at different ways besides sunscreen, like protective clothing, another way we can protect ourselves. We looked at respirators, the two types, air purifying and supplied air respirators. And we looked at how they protect us from inhaling toxins. And we looked at hearing protection because of noise pollution is another one that we want to be careful about that. Earplugs, earmuffs, and all the different ways that we can protect our hearing. Sorry, I just realized that. Show you the screen again. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so that was 3.4, lesson 11. 3.5 is lesson 12, is 3.5 in the textbook. All right, in this one, we are looking at how personal hygiene and household cleanliness can keep us from spreading disease, getting sick ourselves. All right, we looked at the proper way to wash our hands, when we need to wash our hands. We looked at is soap or antibiotic soap, is one better than the other? And we said no, remember that. We looked at how we can disinfect our home, what needs to be cleaned, how to sneeze or cough properly, all those types of ways of avoiding getting sick. We looked at foodborne illness and safe handling practices, all right. We looked at how to avoid botulism, which is another word for food poisoning. And safe practices with that. We looked at food and the temperatures food needs to be cooked, and safe food handling, cleaning your hands and everything, all your surfaces, not cross-contamination, avoiding cross-contamination, cooking your food, putting it in the fridge or the freezer, depending on what you need. Then we went to indoor air quality, and we looked at the fact that we spend so much time indoors, how we could keep the air indoors healthy. And we talked about HVAC and how that can bring in outdoor air and get rid of stale air. Okay, so that was it for that lesson. We're now on unit our section 4.1 of the textbook, lesson 13. Lesson 13. And we're looking at energy. We kind of switched over to energy partway through unit 3. We looked at non-renewable and renewable energy sources. You should be able to tell me several for each one. You should tell me how we produce electricity by burning fossil fuels, how crude oil can get turned into all the different products we get from it. You should know how nuclear power is formed from uranium-235, that is the fuel, and how we use that to create electricity. And you should know about renewable energy sources. You should know about hydroelectric power, solar power, wind power, tidal power, geothermal power. Maybe not so much biomass energy. We didn't spend a lot of time on that. And hydrogen fuel cell, we really didn't spend a lot of time on. But all the other ones, you should know something about all those renewable energy sources, and you should definitely know about burning fossil fuels, and how that turns creates heat that then boils water, and the steam of the water turns the turbine, and that turbine generates electricity that is then put through a transformer and then sent out to households or businesses or wherever it's getting used. So you should know the forms to get that energy, and then how that energy is then converted into electricity. Okay. 4.2 in the textbook, lesson 14, is the costs and benefits of using different types of energy sources. And we went through all of these in great detail. So you should know a cost and a benefit of every single one, especially a fossil fuel, nuclear energy. What's the problem with nuclear energy? You should know that. What's the problem with burning fossil fuels? Should know that. You should know that wind power is the benefits of it, but also what is the issue with using something like wind power? Same with hydroelectric power. What is the cost to hydroelectric power? What does it do to the environment? What's the good about it? Some alternatives. Biodiesel, petroleum diesel, we did a little bit of work on that. So you should just know that what it is. Biodiesel, it's a type of fuel made from plants and animal oils, recycled plant and animal oils, and or algae. Okay, so that's your biodiesel, and it's a chemical process that takes, and these are usually wastes. They're usually recycled plant and animal oils that we then turn into this biodiesel. Okay, and then we are on to conserving energy. Huge lesson 15, last lesson in unit 3. And we know that we should know what units we use to measure energy. You should know the joule and the watt and the kilowatt hour. You should know all three of those, what each of those is and what it measures. The joule measures work, right? And that's the unit. The unit is the joule. The watt is the unit for power, the rate at which work is done. And the kilowatt hour is a measure of how we measure how much electricity we use in our homes in a month. Energy conservation. You should know about light bulbs, what the different light bulbs ability is to what the newer, the older, and what each has for pros and cons. You should know about Energy Star efficiency ratings and appliances and how you want that Energy Star efficiency rating to be lower, and using the Energy Guide, which is the mark that shows you how much it's using, and we should know how to use that label where you look at it to find out if it's a good product to buy. We did a lot on heating and cooling homes, so you should know about thermostats, and you should know about programmable thermostats and how can they help to keep your house cool in the summer or warm in the winter. Looking at energy efficiency, you should be able to talk about windows, doors, insulation, all of that. We did a lot of work on being energy efficient. And then we did a lot of work on conserving energy. What time of day is the best day to be using your dishwasher, washing machine, dryer, that type of thing, and which time of the year does energy usage peak at, and all those types of things. We talked a lot about that stuff. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on conserving energy. Okay, that takes us to the last unit. So, give me a minute here. Just going to go over and get the last unit. There we go. Unit 4, which we just finished yesterday. So I'm hoping everybody's got Unit 4 fresh in their minds. Just getting it on the screen here. All right. Unit 4. Just need to get it on the screen and we're all set to go. And there we go. Alrighty. Unit 4 started off. Unit 4, got it. Okie doke. Unit 4 started off with making building safe and energy efficient. We started with 5.1, which was lesson 16, the last unit. And we looked at the 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, and reuse. Okay, so that was big. The 4 R's, you should know what they are. You should be able to give me examples of each one, what you could do to reuse, what you could do to recycle. We could talk about what types of things can be recycled, what types of things can't be recycled. Could talk about what things we can recycle at home and at work, what we can recover from materials before putting them in the dump. And we looked a lot at about procedures around that and practices and protocols around when we are following the 4 R's. So you should be able to give me examples of each of those 4 R's, and you should be able to tell me how you can you can put those to use in your own lives. Okay, 5.2, which was lesson 17, is dealing with workplace hazards. All right, so we looked at the types of hazards to start off with. We looked at biological hazards. We looked at chemical hazards. We looked at different industries and the types of hazards that you can come up against in various industries. Physical hazards, and how you can avoid them in the workplace. Minimizing risks in the workplace, knowing the hazardous household product symbols, HHPS symbols, what each of them mean, and what to do if you come across them. The WHMIS, we went through WHMIS just briefly. If I would highly suggest to everybody, if you haven't done so already, go do some WHMIS training. And we looked at the WHMIS symbols, and we looked at what happens, what we can do to prevent accidents from happening and what to do if they do happen. We looked at looking at what you can do to make sure you're safer in the workplace. We did quite a bit of work with that one, looking at safety in the workplace, which I think was a great lesson to do. That was lesson 17. All right, we're on to lesson 18. Lesson 18, section 5.3 of the textbook, was making buildings energy efficient. So the first thing we looked at was how we actually use energy in buildings. We talked a lot about how if we reduce the amount of energy we use, we reduce the amount of energy we need to produce, right? So we're looking at being energy efficient, looking at how to make a house, talking about the envelope and how to make a home energy efficient, designing better envelopes around a home. We looked at the R2000 homes. We looked at smart homes, zero energy homes, okay, all different ways we can build homes, and then how we can retrofit older buildings to be energy efficient. Okay. We then went back to ecosystems for a little bit. In lesson number 19, we did section 6.1 to 6.2. So in that one, we looked at 6.1, the importance of biodiversity to the sustainability of life within ecosystems. We looked at the types of biodiversity. You should know biodiversity. We've done lots on it. We looked at the types of biodiversity. We looked at the species biodiversity, how we're looking perhaps because of lack of that, the sixth mass extinction, how we have how biodiversity brings value to our lives, okay, and what happens when something goes extinct, abiotic and biotic factors in ecosystems. You should know limiting factors. You should be able to talk about an example of an animal going extinct or being endangered at the very least. All right, so that was 6.1. 6.2, then we got into measuring and monitoring species biodiversity. So with that, we know that there's lots of species on the planet. We're still uncovering them, and yeah, some of those are now becoming extinct. And we know what that, you should know what that does to an ecosystem when a species becomes extinct, okay? You should know about sampling and monitoring. Measuring and monitoring, those were the two things we went over many times in the course. So how we go about getting samples, we talked about quadrant sampling, and you could have both passive and active sampling. We should know the two of those. Line transect sampling, aerial photography, and all the different types of photography we can do. The Lincoln index and capture mark, we didn't do too much on, but we did talk about capture methods. You should know about aquatic nets, mist nets, helicopter, net gunning and darting, live traps. You should know all those different methods. We talked a lot about those. Wildlife tagging and tracking, we talked about. Measuring and monitoring biodiversity using satellites or GPS tracking. We talked a lot about that as well. So those are all methods we used for sampling and monitoring biodiversity. Definitely biodiversity is going to be on the exam. All right. We're now on the last lesson, lesson 20, and that's when we got into Canada's national resources. So we have, we should know what a natural resource is, that it's a source of wealth that occurs naturally. You should know what the renewable natural resources are in Canada: fisheries, wildlife, forests, water, Okay, those are renewable ones. You should know the non-renewable resources we have in Canada. You should be able to give me examples of those. Fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, coal, bitumen. You should know what that is. It's that solid or thick liquid that is found in the oil sands of Alberta. We finished off the course by looking at a little study of that. You should look at what happens when we use coal. You should know that. We've done that enough times. Minerals and metals. You should know some examples of what minerals or metals we mine in Canada. And you should be able to talk about each of those renewable and non-renewable resources and how they're important to us in Canada. All right, we are on the second part of lesson 20, methods for extracting Canada's natural resources. You should know commercial fishing methods, the good and the bad, what are good and bad about those methods. You should know what bycatch mortality is. That's the fish that you don't want to catch that gets caught in your net and then dies. Can have a huge impact. It could also be marine mammals. It could be dolphins or something getting caught in your net and dying. So you do not want that happen. To look at selective fishing, look at some of those that allows you to not just go out and, fish everything and throw away anything you don't want and have a high bycatch mortality. Open net cage fish farms, we did go over a little bit. Silviculture. Silviculture is a variety of ways that we manage forests, okay? So you should know what a forest stand is, a group of trees that share similar characteristics. You should know what even-aged and uneven-aged silviculture systems are. And you should know about clear-cut systems and selection systems. Those two are good. As long as you know those two, you'll be fine. Advantages and disadvantages of the different types of silviculture systems. You should know about mining, in particular salt mining. We did a lot of work on that, and the two methods, the underground room and pillar mining, and brining. You should know what those are. And that is it for lesson 20, part 2, and we go to the last one, managing Canada's natural resources. And you should know what viable means. If something is ability to be used in a practical way means viable, and something has to be viable for us to use it to use that natural resource has to be viable. We talked about ways of tracking, monitoring fish and fisheries. We looked at forestry and when you're managing a forest, the important factors you have to look at. We looked at succession models. Should know something about a succession model. Should know about a core sample, what it can show you. Okay. We looked at minerals and some of the negative effects of mining and what it's done to some communities. Environmental impact assessments before doing a mine, some of the things that would be included in that, some things you need to take into account. And then the oil sands. There was quite a bit on the oil sands in the course. We talked a lot more about what they were. And then at the very end, we talked actually about the environmental impact that mining the oil sands has on the ecosystems in that area. All right, that was the course. That was it. I hope that you've got all your notes ready for the final exam. Let me know if you have any questions on any of the material. I went through it pretty quickly to get us ready for the exam. Let me know when you're ready, and I will make sure that you get the final exam. The final exam is worth 30% of the overall mark for the course, and the lessons 1 to 20 are worth 70%. So you're already done 70% of the course if you've done all your lessons. Now you just need to do the final exam. It's been wonderful to teach this course with you. I probably have learned more than any of the students. I've been doing this course for quite a while, but never actually did it on the air, on the radio. So it was a wonderful way to learn a lot of the information in depth, I do have to say. It's been very good to be here. I've really enjoyed it, and maybe I'll be back for another course. Thank you so much for joining me. Good night.